The midday sun burned mercilessly over the small town of Dry Creek. Dust swirled through the wooden streets as men gathered. Near the center square, their voices rough, their laughter hollow. It was auction day, one of those grim events where lost souls were sold to the highest bidder. Among the lined-up captives stood a young Apache woman, her wrists bound, her face streaked with dust and pride. Her dark eyes didn't flinch even as jeers rose from the crowd. She stood tall, her posture defying the humiliation, her braids falling over her shoulders like ropes of fire. The sheriff barked orders while the auctioneer shouted prices, but no one stepped forward. Men who would pay gold for a fine horse wouldn't spend a single coin on her. Half-blood, someone spat. Savage, the crowd laughed, their voices carrying cruelty that weighed heavier than chains. At the edge of the crowd stood a man apart, a quiet rancher named Elijah Boone. He was not the kind who sought trouble, nor the kind who boasted. His hat shadowed his eyes, his vest worn from years of labor under the sun. People said he spoke more to his horses than to humans. Yet as he watched the auction, his jaw tightened. He didn't see a savage, he saw a person, standing with a courage none of the bidders possessed. The auctioneer's voice cracked with frustration. "No one?" he shouted. "She'll be sent to the mines if nobody takes her." The crowd began to disperse. The woman's head bowed, not from shame but exhaustion. She whispered something in her native tongue, a word Elijah didn't understand. But somehow it cut through the noise. He felt it in his chest like the echo of a prayer. Then, as the last of the crowd turned away, Elijah stepped forward. The dusty boards creaked beneath his boots. The auctioneer blinked, surprised. "You, Boone, didn't take you for the charity type." Elijah didn't answer. He reached into his coat, pulled out a pouch, and threw it at the man's feet. The heavy clink of silver cut through the silence. The Apache woman lifted her eyes, confusion flickering into disbelief. "You sure about this?" The auctioneer sneered. Elijah's voice came low but firm. "I'm sure." The transaction was made quickly. Papers were signed. Chains were unshackled. As the sheriff turned away, Elijah handed her his canteen. "You're free now," he said simply. But she didn't move. Her lips trembled, her voice low. "No one buys freedom here," she whispered. Elijah looked at her for a long moment before replying, "Then maybe it's time someone did." They walked away from the auction, square as the crowd whispered. Behind them, the sound of gossip chasing them down the dusty street. The sun dipped low, painting the horizon with fire, and two unlikely souls disappeared into the wild. A rancher who had lost too much to speak, and a woman who refused to bow to the world's cruelty. As night fell, the desert wind carried strange peace. The woman sat by the campfire, silent, her face lit by the flames. Elijah prepared the horses, pretending not to notice how her hands trembled as she tried to drink. "You could have left me," she said softly. "Why didn't you?" He looked into the fire, the shadows flickering across his face. "Maybe I saw someone who reminds me what freedom's supposed to look like." For a long time, they said nothing. Two broken lives bound by fate, and a quiet understanding that something had begun that day, something neither of them could name. The next morning, dawn spilled gold across the plains. Elijah's ranch sat miles away, acres of open land kissed by wind and wild horses. As they arrived, the Apache woman gazed at the endless fields, her expression unreadable. "You can stay here until you decide where to go," Elijah said, untying her horse. She hesitated. "My name is Ayanna," she finally said, her voice steady but soft. He nodded once. Elijah. The air between them felt like an unspoken treaty. Two names, two worlds, crossing a line drawn long before either of them was born. Days turned to weeks. Ayanna began to work alongside him, feeding the horses, fixing fences, mending the earth scarred by drought. Elijah noticed she never complained, even when the sun burned her skin raw. At night, she would sit near the corral, whispering to the horses in her language. And somehow they listened. One evening, Elijah caught himself smiling. "You've got away with them," he said quietly. She looked up, her eyes meeting his. "They understand pain," she said. "Animals know when a heart has been hurt." Elijah froze for a second, because he knew she wasn't just talking about horses. One stormy night, thunder cracked over the plains. The cattle panicked, fences broke, and chaos swept across the ranch. Elijah ran out into the rain to calm the herd, but a stampede surged toward him. Before he could move, Ayanna leapt from the fence, grabbing a rope, her voice cutting through the roar. The horses stilled as if her words carried magic. Together, drenched in mud and lightning, they brought the herd under control. When it was over, Elijah turned to her, breathless. "You saved my life," he said. She smiled faintly. "You saved mine first." In the days that followed, something unspoken grew between them. Not romance born of pity, but respect carved by courage. Ayanna taught Elijah words of her people, and he taught her to ride his best stallion. When a group of men came from town weeks later, mocking Elijah for keeping an Indian woman, he stood firm. "This land is free," he said, his voice cold as steel. "And so is she. Anyone got a problem with that can ride. The other way." The men laughed but didn't return. That evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, Ayanna stood beside him. "You didn't have to defend me," she whispered. Elijah turned to her. "Yes, I did," he said quietly. "Because no one should ever stand alone again." Years later, people would tell stories about the quiet rancher who defied the town to save a woman the world had thrown away. Some said they fell in love. Others said they built the first ranch where whites and natives worked side by side. But the truth lay in the way they looked at each other, not as savior and saved, but as equals who taught each other what humanity really means. And if you're listening to this story right now, remember, sometimes the smallest step forward can change more than a life. It can change a world. So if you believe in courage and kindness, and in standing up when no one else does, subscribe to our channel for more stories like this. Because every view, every click, every word you share, helps keep the spirit of the wild, West, and the power of humanity alive.